Dear our listeners, welcome to our International English Hub, where you learn real-world English from news or real stories, and at the same time you also stay updated with big events and stories in our globe. It is always a pleasure to have you join us. Whether you are listening from home, on your way to work, or on your evening walk, we are so happy that you have joined today's podcast. Our purpose is simple: to assist you learn English through authentic worldwide topics or events. As such, each episode provides you with new vocabulary, concise explanations, and practical conversions that broaden your knowledge of the world. Let's jump straight to our today's podcast, which is on major global events and news. As the world navigates a complex landscape of political, social, economic, and environmental challenges, November 9, 2025, stands out as a day marked by significant global events. From ongoing conflicts and humanitarian crises to pivotal political changes, economic developments, and technological breakthroughs, today's headlines reflect the interconnectedness of nations and the urgency of collective action. This report synthesizes coverage from leading international media outlets, including CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, CGTN, The New York Times, and others, to provide a thorough, paragraph-driven summary of the most consequential news stories. Each section is followed by a dedicated language learning tips segment, designed to help English learners expand their vocabulary, master common expressions, and understand key grammar points as they engage with current affairs. 1. Gaza: ongoing conflict and humanitarian crisis. Despite a ceasefire agreement brokered in October, Israeli airstrikes and demolitions continue to devastate the Gaza Strip. According to Al Jazeera and UN agencies, the Israeli military has maintained strict curbs on humanitarian aid, resulting in severe shortages of food, water, and medical supplies. The Health Ministry in Gaza reports that over 68,800 Palestinians have been killed and more than 170,000 wounded since October 2023, with most casualties being women and children. The situation is compounded by the destruction of infrastructure, homes, hospitals, and schools, leaving hundreds of thousands displaced. UNRWA schools, once centers of learning, now double as shelters for families, with more than 300,000 students deprived of formal education. Aid agencies warn that the slow pace of relief deliveries, coupled with the onset of winter, threatens to exacerbate an already dire humanitarian situation. Reports also highlight a surge in Israeli settler violence in the West Bank, with attacks on Palestinian farmers and journalists, and ongoing military raids resulting in further casualties and arrests. For English learners listening, it is a good moment to remember the following useful words: ceasefire, devastate, shortage, and displaced. Ceasefire is a temporary suspension of fighting. For example, despite the ceasefire, attacks continued. Devastate means to cause a great damage or destruction. Example, the airstrikes devastated the city. Shortage means a lack of something which is in need. For instance, there is a shortage of medical supplies. Displaced is leaving one's home by force, usually in conflicts. Example, hundreds of thousands have been displaced. These words are often used when talking about wars and conflicts. It is also important to take note of the following phrasal verbs, like carry out and step up. Carry out means to perform or conduct. For example, Israeli forces carried out raids. And step up means to increase efforts. For instance, UN agencies are stepping up relief operations. 2. Sudan: escalating violence and humanitarian emergency. Sudan's North Darfur region, particularly the city of Al Fasher, has become the epicenter of renewed violence as the Rapid Support Forces, known as RSF, militia captured the city after a prolonged siege. UN agencies report widespread atrocities, including executions, sexual violence, and mass displacement. Nearly 82,000 people have fled Al Fasher since late October, many seeking refuge in already overcrowded camps in Tawila and across the border in Chad, which now hosts 1.4 million Sudanese refugees. UN experts have expressed alarm at ethnically targeted killings and systematic sexual violence, warning that these acts may constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. The humanitarian crisis is deepening, with famine confirmed in Al Fasher and Kadugli, and millions lacking access to food, water, and medical care. Aid workers face significant risks, and the international community is being urged to intensify efforts to protect civilians and ensure accountability for perpetrators. To our English learning listeners, let's reflect on important vocabularies from this news. The key vocabulary includes epicenter, atrocities, siege, and refugee. Epicenter means the central point of something, especially a difficult situation. Example, Al-Fashir is the epicenter of violence. The word atrocities means extremely cruel acts. For instance, reports of atrocities in Al-Fashir have shocked the world. Siege means a military blockade of a city. Example, after 540 days of siege, the city fell. And refugee is a person forced to flee their country. Example, Chad hosts 1.4 million Sudanese refugees. And the important phrasal verbs is flee from, which means to escape. For example, thousands have fled from Al-Fashir. 3. Ukraine, Russian strikes and energy crisis. Ukraine continues to endure relentless Russian drone and missile attacks targeting energy infrastructure. BBC News reports that in the latest barrage, at least 6 people were killed, including 3 in Dnipro when a residential building was struck. More than 400 drones and 45 missiles were launched, hitting 25 locations and leaving many areas without electricity or heating as winter approaches. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called for increased Western sanctions on Russia, criticizing recent moves by the U.S. to grant Hungary a 1-year exemption from sanctions on Russian oil and gas. The attacks are seen as an attempt by Russia to undermine Ukrainian morale and economy, especially as the conflict grinds on with high casualties on both sides. The humanitarian impact is severe, with millions facing power outages and disrupted services. Language learning tips. Key vocabulary. Barrage means a concentrated artillery bombardment. Example, a barrage of missiles struck the city. Morale means the confidence and enthusiasm of a group. For instance, the attacks aim to undermine morale. And exemption means the official permission not to do something. Example, Hungary received an exemption from sanctions. For our English learners, it's also important to memorize the phrasal verb call for, which means to demand something. Example, Zelensky called for more sanctions. For U.S. government shutdown, domestic impacts and political stalemate. The United States is experiencing the longest government shutdown in its history, now in its 37th day. The impasse centers on disagreements over healthcare subsidies and budget allocations. The shutdown has led to thousands of federal furloughs, disruptions in public services, and a reduction in SNAP food aid benefits. The Supreme Court temporarily paused a lower court's order requiring the government to fully fund November SNAP payments, creating uncertainty for millions of Americans who rely on food assistance. Additionally, the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) has announced a 10% reduction in flights at 40 major airports, including New York, Atlanta, and Los Angeles, due to staffing shortages and budget constraints. Airlines are offering refunds and adjusting schedules, but travelers face widespread cancellations and delays. Political leaders remain deadlocked, with both parties blaming each other for the crisis. We want our English learners to pay attention to the following key vocabularies, such as shutdown, impasse, furlough, and subsidy. Shutdown means the closure of government operations. Example, the government shutdown continues. Impasse is a situation where no progress is possible. For instance, negotiations are at an impasse. Furlough means temporary leave for employees. For example, thousands of workers have been furloughed due to the government shutdown. And the meaning of subsidy is financial assistance. For example, healthcare subsidies are at the center of the dispute. In addition to these useful vocabularies, it is also important to remember phrasal verbs like hold out. Hold out means to refuse to give in. For example, both Republicans and Democrats are holding out for their demands. 5. International diplomacy and summits. Doha G20 COP30. The Second World Summit for Social Development concluded in Doha, Qatar, with broad international acclaim for its achievements. The summit adopted the Doha Political Declaration, emphasizing the need to move from commitments to action on poverty reduction, decent work, and social inclusion. Over 40 heads of state and 14,000 participants attended, discussing practical solutions for expanding social protection, healthcare, and education. The summit marked a shift from diagnosing problems to implementing solutions, with a focus on investing in people as the most sustainable path to peace and prosperity. Regional economic commissions pledged support for countries to translate commitments into policy, particularly in Africa, where youth potential and social development are seen as keys to future stability. Meanwhile, preparations for COP30, the Global Climate Conference, are underway. The United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, released its Emissions Gap Report 2025, warning that current climate pledges are insufficient to prevent catastrophic warming, with projections showing a likely temperature rise of 2.3 to 2.5 degrees Celsius this century. The report calls for urgent emission cuts and increased climate finance, especially for developing nations. Language learning tips. Key vocabularies. Acclaim means enthusiastic approval. Example, the summit concluded with broad acclaim. Declaration, an official statement. For instance, the Doha Political Declaration was adopted. Implementation, putting plans into effect. For example, focus is now on implementation. Pledge, a serious promise. Example, nations made new climate pledges. 6. Elections and political changes. Tanzania, New York City, India, Bihar. Tanzania. Tanzania is grappling with post-election turmoil after dozens of opposition supporters were charged with treason following deadly protests over the disputed October 29 presidential election. Human rights groups allege that security forces killed more than 1,000 people during the unrest, though the government disputes this figure. The African Union criticized the election for failing to meet democratic standards, citing ballot stuffing, internet blackouts, and excessive military force. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, who won with nearly 98% of the vote, faces calls for reconciliation and accountability. New York City. In the United States, Zoran Mamdani, a Democratic socialist, won the New York City mayoral race, defeating Republican Curtis Sliwa and Independent Andrew Cuomo. Mamdani's campaign focused on affordability, promising rent freezes, free public transportation, universal childcare, and higher taxes on the wealthy. Voter turnout surpassed 2 million, the highest since 1969, reflecting widespread concern over cost of living and public services. The election is seen as a bellwether for progressive politics in the U.S., with national implications for the Democratic Party. India, India's Bihar state held the first phase of its assembly elections, recording a historic 65% voter turnout. Both the ruling NDA and opposition Mahagathbandhan claim the high turnout favors their side, but analysts caution that turnout alone does not predict outcomes. The surge is attributed to a special intensive revision of voter rolls, increased participation by women and youth, and favorable weather conditions. The results, due November 14, will reveal whether the electorate seeks continuity or change. Language learning tips to our English learning listeners. Key vocabulary. Turmoil, a state of confusion or disorder. Example, post-election turmoil grips Tanzania. Bellwether, an indicator of future trends. For instance, the NYC election is a bellwether. Turnout, the number of people who vote. Example, voter turnout was historic. Reconciliation, means restoring friendly relations. For example, calls for reconciliation are growing. We would also like our dear English learners take note of phrasal verbs like step down, which means to resign, usually from a position. Example, Pelosi announced she will step down. 7. Natural disasters and humanitarian emergencies. Afghanistan, Philippines, Vietnam, Brazil. Afghanistan. A magnitude 6.3 earthquake struck northern Afghanistan near Mazar-i-Sharif, killing at least 20 people and injuring over 300. The disaster damaged the historic Blue Mosque and left many residents homeless. Afghanistan, already reeling from previous earthquakes and chronic poverty, faces challenges in mounting effective rescue and relief operations due to poor infrastructure and limited international aid. Philippines and Vietnam. Typhoon Kalmiji battered the central Philippines, causing at least 66 deaths and widespread flooding, particularly in Cebu. A military helicopter crashed during rescue operations, killing 6 crew members. The storm forced tens of thousands to evacuate, destroyed homes, and disrupted power and transportation. As recovery efforts continue, the country braces for another super typhoon, Phongwang, expected to make landfall soon. In Vietnam, Kalmiji caused further devastation with at least 5 deaths and over 1 million people experiencing power outages. Brazil. Southern Brazil was hit by a tornado in Rio Bonito do Iguaçu, killing at least 6 people and injuring more than 750. The tornado destroyed 80% of the city, prompting a state of calamity. Language learning tips. Key vocabulary. Magnitude. The size or strength of something, in this context an earthquake. For instance, a magnitude 6.3 quake struck. Battered means hit repeatedly, for example, the typhoon battered the Philippines. Evacuate means to leave a dangerous place, example, residents were evacuated. Calamity, which means a disaster, for example, a state of calamity was declared. Dear our English learning listeners, please also take a note of the phrasal verbs such as set in, which means to begin and seem likely to continue, for example, winter is setting in. Wipe out means to destroy completely, for instance, the tornado wiped out the city. 8. Global economy and trade. US-China relations tariffs. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping reached a new trade and economic agreement, hailed as a major victory for both sides. China agreed to halt the flow of fentanyl precursors to the US, eliminate export controls on rare earth minerals, and suspend retaliatory tariffs on US agricultural products. In return, the US will lower certain tariffs on Chinese imports and suspend heightened tariffs until November 2026. The deal is expected to boost US exports of soybeans and other goods, while easing tensions in the global supply chain. However, the US Supreme Court is currently hearing a case on the legality of Trump's broad tariff regime, which has generated $151 billion in customs duties in the past 6 months but faces legal challenges over presidential authority. The outcome could have significant implications for global trade and the US economy. Our English learning listeners, please pay attention to the following language learning tips. Key vocabulary. Tariff, which means a tax on imports or exports. For instance, the US imposed new tariffs on imported goods from China. Retaliatory means something done in response to an action. Example, China suspended retaliatory tariffs. And the last one, supply chain, which is the sequence of processes involved in production and distribution. For instance, the deal eases supply chain tensions. Phrasal verbs. Phase out, to gradually or slowly stop something. Example, the US will phase out certain tariffs. Step up means to increase. For example, China will step up purchases of US goods. 9. Science, technology, and AI developments. China's artificial intelligence (AI) sector is advancing rapidly through a distributed, experiment-driven approach, integrating local governments, universities, and startups in a collaborative ecosystem. Unlike previous top-down projects, China's AI development is characterized by widespread experimentation and localized support, fostering innovation across multiple sectors. Major tech companies coexist with smaller startups, creating a diverse landscape of technological exploration. The government's 15th Five-Year Plan emphasizes self-reliance and the integration of education, technology, and talent development. In the US, Apple announced that its next-generation Siri will be powered by Google's Gemini AI model, marking a significant partnership between the two tech giants. The new Siri will be capable of more complex tasks and is expected to launch in 2026. Tesla shareholders approved a $1 trillion pay package for CEO Elon Musk, contingent on the company meeting ambitious milestones over the next decade. We like our English learners to pay attention to the following language learning tips from this science and technology news. Key vocabulary. Ecosystem means a system of interconnected elements. Example, a collaborative ecosystem fosters innovation. Experiment-driven means based on a testing and experimentation. For instance, China's AI is experiment-driven. Milestone means a significant achievement. For example, Tesla must meet certain milestones. Phrasal verbs. Roll out means to launch or introduce. Example, Apple will roll out the new Siri. Scale up means to increase in size or scope. For instance, China is scaling up AI development. Listing real-world stories like this will help you internalize common words, expressions, and grammar, thereby you will be able to use English in a meaningful way. At the same time, you also stay up to date on big events and issues happening in the world. Finally, we invite our listeners to interact with us. Think about today's news or events and share your opinions in the comments. Write where you are listening and tell us your opinions on today's podcast using the words and expressions we discussed today. This active practice will make your English learning process more interactive and enjoyable. Goodbye for now and see you in our next episodes.